Hi, I'm Darren from ZDS Studio, and today I'd like to introduce you to the ZDS Shifter. The shifter is a direct replacement for your merge brick. It has the same input and output and power jacks as the merge brick. It's able to power your Zen drum directly. It has the same power LED up here. It also doubles as the MIDI activity light. It will flicker whenever it sees MIDI activity. In addition to the MIDI jacks, it also has a USB-B jack. If you're used to using something like the M-Audio Uno or some other type of device where you have MIDI going to USB, you don't need this anymore. Shifter is a replacement for that, so you don't need a merge brick, you don't need an Uno. Get rid of all that. All you need is a shifter. The two foot switches on top of the shifter function as programmable CC controls, and we'll go over to the computer now and I'll show you how you set all that up. Okay, so here's the software interface that appears when you've connected the shifter via USB. And as you can see, it's split into two sections. This top section has a visual representation of the shifter's current settings and current state. And at the bottom, we have an area where we program the shift rules. Let's start at the top here. So this red section, there's a drop down here for the power LED. Normally the power LED is on, but then will flicker when there's MIDI activity. But depending on your situation or your preferences, you can change it to be the opposite. So it's off, but it will flicker when there's activity, or always on or always off. This really depends on whether or not you're being distracted by the LED flickering on stage. There's also a control here to turn either the DIN out or the USB out on and off. That's going to depend on whether you have different sound modules and your routing and things like that. You probably don't have to worry about it. The settings are probably just fine by default. Okay, and next up we have controls for the two foot switches. And by the way, all the LED indicators here are live. So if I were to step on foot switch 1, you'll see that it enables and that the power LED flickered to indicate that there was MIDI activity. And if I lift my foot up, it turns off. So these foot switches are CC controls. And here's where you can set the message number and the channel that they transmit on. There's also controls here to determine whether it's a latching foot switch or a momentary foot switch. So if you put your foot down and then lift it, does it stay on or does it turn off? There's also polarity settings here. So when the shifter first starts up, whether the CC control is on initially or not. Now, one thing to point out, anything in this red box, all of these settings, when you change them, the shifter does have to restart. It needs to reboot so that the engine stays in sync with the interface. This just takes a second or two, but it's something to be aware of. So for instance, if I were to change this polarity to be normally on, you'll see that it takes a second for it to reboot. And that when it did reboot, the foot switch is initially on now. And I'll just change it back. So that's just something to be aware of, that it will need to reboot whenever you change anything in the red section. All the groups down below, which we'll get into next, that doesn't happen, and all the settings are immediately applied. Now, real quick before we start talking about programming of the shift rules and the groups, is I want to point out that there is a menu up here where you can back up and restore all the settings for your shifter. That includes all of the settings in the red box and all the rules. And you can also perform a reset here. This will be an invaluable tool when you're first experimenting with rules and want them changed back. Or you may find that with different groups or with different set lists that you use different sets of rules, and here you can back up and restore them. It's really simple. Everything is saved to a text file. It's really easy to back up and then restore. Okay, so let's start talking about groups now. You'll notice that there are 4 groups down here, but there's only 2 foot switches. The first 2 groups are linked to the 2 foot switches, and you can tell by this little label here. The linkage between them is simply that the channel and CC messages match what the foot switch is set to. So to control the other 2 groups, you'll need to use an external CC. This can be the momentary switch on your Zen drum or a different controller. Anything that can generate a CC message is able to control the shifter. You're not limited to just the 2 foot switches. And the way this works is everything in one group is turned on or off when that CC message is present. So if we add a bunch of rules to group A here, they'll all be controlled when footswitch 1 is enabled. And that goes for all the groups, so you're able to logically group rules. Okay, one other thing to be aware of is the shifter uses ZDS style mapping files. So if you have map files that you've created in ZDS or in Restomp or the Stomp block interface, you can import those mapping files into the shifter, so then your note numbers will match up to your note names. In this case, I'm using BFD3, so I've imported my BFD3 mapping file. I'm using that. Now I'm going to create a simple rule here to get started with. And to do that, I click on the Add button. Now this brings up the Rule Edit interface. All rules have an input and an output. And what the shifter does is when MIDI activity is happening, it's looking at those messages to see if their signature matches one of the inputs of the rule. And if they do, it modifies the message to match the output. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a rule that whenever we see snare hits, I'm going to turn them into cross sticks, or side stick in the nomenclature of the BFD3. Hit apply, and that rule's been created. So now whenever FS1 is engaged, this rule will take effect, and any snare hits that are coming down the pipe will be turned into cross stick. Let's go over to the Zendrum now and see how that works. Okay, so please bear with me as I try to cram everything in the frame here. For the purpose of this demonstration, my left hand is going to simply just be my foot, so I'll be pressing the foot switches with my hand. My right hand will just be doing a one-handed groove up here. As far as layout goes, we have kick, closed hat, snare, and open hat. And then when I press the foot switch, you should hear the snare switch to a cross stick. So here we go. So there you go. I'm able to switch instruments on the fly without my hands leaving the Zendrum. Okay, for this next example, I've set up a bit of a more complex set of rules. These are all under Group B, so they'll be controlled by footswitch 2. And this is to solve a problem that I run into sometimes with live performances, and that's where my cymbals are just a bit too harsh. It could be a quiet portion of the song or a quiet song in general. And I don't want my cymbals to be crashing. I want to be able to just lightly play on the bow and play the bells and not worry about a loud crash happening by accident. So what I'm going to do is set this foot switch to be latching, so I can just turn it on with my foot and leave it on for as long as I need. And you'll see that all of these rules, they all take edge hits in as input, or hits in the case of crashes, and they turn them into bow hits. So with this on, I should have a much lighter performance. Let's go over to the Zendrum now and see how this works. Okay, so once again, it's a tight squeeze here, but I think you'll get the general idea. Foot switch 2 down here is latching, so when I hit it once, it'll stay on until I hit it again. My cymbals are kind of spread out, but you should be able to get the general idea here. So hopefully you can see how that can be very handy. Now for this last example, I want to show you how to accomplish something that I see a lot of requests for, and that's how to do note stacking with your Zendrum, regardless of sound source. So let's go ahead and create a rule that whenever I hit a particular cymbal, an edge hit, that it will automatically play the kick drum for me. So we'll add a new entry. You can press the Add button, or you can just press N on your keyboard. and it's cymbal 1 edge hits that I want to play a kick drum. Now I don't want to replace crash 1 hits with a kick drum, I want to stack them. And to do that, I just change note on to be note stack. And that's what this rule will do. Whenever it sees a note on message for a crash 1 hit, it will play that, but it will also then play the kick. Hit apply. There's our rule. Let's take that over to the Zendrum and try it out. Okay, so this is my crash 1. So with the shifter turned off, we just get normal crashes. But when I turn it on, now we get the stack. That'll work with any sound source. It has nothing to do with the sound source. It's the shifter doing the magic. Pretty neat, huh? Alright, so that concludes this overview of the shifter. I hope you found it helpful. I do want to point out that there is a manual up on the website that does go into more detail of all the topics that we covered here, plus additional features. If you have any questions at all, feel free to leave them below in the comments, and thanks for watching.